I'm genuinely interested in this question, and I find we have a house in Nantucket, have for a lot of years, and I find my wife is ardently anti the windmills, and my daughters are ardently pro. So this is how we figure out the great issues of our time, is go and listen. There will be only 2 speakers, for and again. They'll each speak up to 15 minutes on their first go. Then they'll have a session for rebuttal, and then naturally we will go to the phones and try to engage everybody here that wants to be engaged with questions that haven't been covered. But Audra Parker leads off, speaking for the Alliance to Protect Nantucket Sound. Audra Parker, please.
Hi, can you hear me all right? I'm Audra Parker. I'm the Assistant Director for the Alliance to Protect Nantucket Sound, and I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation for you. But before I start, I just wanted to say that Cape Wind is a controversial project, and it's gained both local and national attention because it is the first project of its kind in the United States. And it's controversial by that fact, but also by the fact that although it is renewable energy and promises the benefits of renewable energy, there's a lot of costs associated with the developer-chosen site in Nantucket Sound. And what I'd like to do is just talk about the costs and the benefits of this project so that you can make your own informed decision about whether or not this project makes sense, and from the interest of the public, not necessarily from the interest of a developer that is seeking profit from this project. And finally, I'd like to point out that the question isn't really about whether or not we should build Cape Wind per se. It's about whether this is the best alternative, if it really makes sense, if it's the best alternative to achieve the benefits that the project offers with the least costs and the least conflicts and the least risks for the public. Just a little bit about the Alliance to Protect Nantucket Sound. We're a nonprofit environmental organization. We've been in place about 3 or 4 years. The organization was started in response to the Cape Wind project, which was perceived as a threat to Nantucket Sound. We have a broader mission, though, which is really the long-term protection of Nantucket Sound. In the last year or so, we have been awarded the Soundkeeper license. We're the official Soundkeeper for Nantucket Sound, which is part of the International Waterkeeper Alliance that was started by Bobby Kennedy. And so as such, while we focus a good deal of our time on the Cape Wind project, seeing it as the first threat to Nantucket Sound, we've also done things like establish pollution hotlines. We'll have water quality monitoring programs. So overall, we're really looking at long-term protection of Nantucket Sound. I'm sure Jim will get into this, but just a little bit of an overview about the Cape Wind project. It is the first proposed offshore wind plant in the United States. As I mentioned, there are offshore wind plants today, but they're in Europe, not in the United States. It is a project of 130 wind turbines, each in excess of 400 feet tall, and I'll show you some scale charts after this, would be less than 5 miles from shore. And part of that is a massive transformer substation. So in addition to the 130 turbines, there's that structure over there, which would hold 40,000 gallons of oil and is about the size of a 10-story parking garage. This just shows the proposed location. You see the islands of Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, and the Cape Cod mainland. And there's 2 footprints there. One was a previous proposal, and then one is an adjusted footprint. And the reason that's important is that it's really a unique geography where you have state waters from mainland out 3 miles. And because you've got the islands surrounding Nantucket Sound, you basically have what we refer to technically as a hole in the donut, where you have federal waters inside of state waters. And the state waters are a state ocean sanctuary protected under the Massachusetts Ocean Sanctuaries Act that prohibits electrical generation. So this project is not possible in state waters. And there was a change in the boundary because of some rock formations, and Cape Wind actually had to move some of the turbines to move them out of state waters into federal waters. That's why you see two footprints there. That's the red area. The other two gray areas are alternative sites that had been looked at. And again, in the process, the Army Corps was in charge of the process, and they were required to look at alternative sites, starting with 20 some odd sites. Most of the ones that ended up in the short list were actually in this area. This gives you a sense of scale. So you see the turbines at 417 feet tall, 100 feet taller than the Statue of Liberty, and just gives you some sense of scale. Another thing that may be useful to you is the turbine that's on the highway by the IBW area, and I think that one's about 140 feet. So these are, 3 times the height and significantly larger in diameter, and again, 130 of them, not just one. Again, the transformer substation, I don't need to go into that. Go ahead. Okay, again, the way I look at it, my background is in economics, and I look at things as trade-offs, cost versus benefits. So I'm going to go through and obviously give you our perspective, which is that, the benefits do not justify the cost, or the costs outweigh the benefits. But from the benefit side, clearly it is renewable energy, so it does have some benefits, which by its nature makes the project controversial. It is, again, renewable energy, which is perceived as a blanket good. But again, I ask you to seriously consider the costs and the trade-offs involved with those benefits. The project would not appreciably reduce emissions, would not significantly reduce dependence on foreign oil. The perception, I believe, in the public is that because wind is free, this is actually an inexpensive form of electricity generation. It's not true. It's a $1 billion capital investment. So while the wind is free, the cost of harnessing that wind is clearly not. And overall, the project would produce only 1% of New England's needs. That's the benefit side. This shows you the one of the big selling points of this project is that it's going to reduce our dependence on oil. And I just wanted to show you, if you looked at overall our oil use in the United States, this is how it pans out. You have transportation, cars, trucks, et cetera, using 68% of our oil. You have electricity generation using only 3% of our oil. And NRDC, which tends to be a supporter of this project, says in a recent policy statement, whatever the various merits of solar, wind, nuclear et al., they have nothing to do with reducing our oil dependence. So again, just on the perception that it's reducing our dependence on foreign oil, or our dependence on oil is great, but the reality is quite different. And if we were serious about reducing our dependence on oil, we would be looking at the transportation sector, not at electricity generation. Global warming, again, reducing carbon dioxide emissions, true. I think Jim will talk about, if he does, I think it's 1 million tons. But again, major costs of local economy and environment. And I just give you some equivalents, because to me, when I first got involved in this project, I didn't actually know what is 1 million tons, a lot, a little. And just to give you some equivalents, you could, alternative ways of reducing that same amount that Cape Wind promises would be something like using 1 less tank of gas per year for all New England households. So it just gives you an idea of the magnitude of that. On the cost side, well, there's a variety of costs. In the press, there's a lot of attention on wealthy waterfront homeowners. NIMBY, we just want to protect our wealthy waterfront trophy homes on Cape Cod, but there's actually a great deal of, I'd say, more legitimate, more politically correct issues that have to deal with environmental issues, economic factors, and most notably what's been in the press recently is public safety concerns. And I'll go into all of these in more detail. I'm good. On the environmental side, this project would be sited in underneath the Atlantic Flyway, which is a major migratory pathway for birds. Many of the avian agencies have asked for a minimum of 3 years of study to determine whether or not these impacts would be serious, and establishing standards on what is an appropriate amount of bird kill. What are standards? You have an environment with harbor seals, gray seals, porpoises, endangered sea turtles, and overall habitat alteration, where you would be having 130 structures drilled 80 feet into the seabed. So what's that going to do to the benthos in terms of altering the habitat? The fishermen are a very strong group, and they have, across the board, the fishermen that fish Nantucket Sound have opposed this project because they say that this project would displace commercial fishermen. And I just put this up. This is the Massachusetts Fishermen's Partnership, who's written numerous letters saying that it would displace commercial fishermen, and it's an umbrella organization of 18 groups, and that is the membership. Everything from Gloucester Fishermen Wives Association to, you can read it, but it's a very large group of commercial fishermen. Economic issues, I just mentioned the loss of critical fishing grounds, where the fishermen have done surveys showing that 50 to 60% of the commercial catch in Nantucket Sound actually comes from Horseshoe Shoals, which is the location of the proposed site. Loss of jobs, primarily related to tourism, and again, Cape Wind will say that it'll actually increase tourism, that there's no examples of where tourism is decreased, and in fact, a survey that was done that was site-specific to Nantucket Sound, again, based on interviews, not based on actual experience, but specific to Nantucket Sound, has estimated that you'd have in the order of $100 million of lost tourism because people would be less likely to go to Cape Cod because it would be industrialized, and an accompanying loss of tourist-related jobs, even net of the construction jobs and small amount of maintenance jobs that Cape Wind promises to create. And finally, on the taxpayer subsidy side, the Cape Wind project will be heavily subsidized both at a state and federal level in the range of $70 million per year. Public safety, I'm sure you've been reading about, and I imagine Jim will talk about this also, but there's been many studies that have come out of the UK that have looked at radar interference for marine vessels, for air traffic, and also for military defense, and have come out and said that there are significant issues with radar interference. Pursuant to that, there was an amendment put in the Coast Guard reauthorization bill that called for a 1.5-mile buffer zone between any offshore wind turbines and shipping lanes, ferry channels, and that has been, very, very controversial. Other issues would be search and rescue, and again, fishing. A lot of the gear fishermen are saying that the amount of room between the turbines would impede their ability to actually fish Nantucket Sound and preserve one of the traditional uses of the Sound. This is a picture that basically shows the proposed footprint, again, up here, and these lines are shipping and ferry channels. So this one, particularly this red one, is the main shipping channel, and the Cape Wind footprint is less than 0.2 nautical miles from that. So again, very, very little room for maneuvering if there were some kind of an operating issue with one of these vessels that is frequently traversing Nantucket Sound. I talked about this already. This is basically saying that there are groups in the UK, like the Chamber of Shipping, that have called for anywhere from 1.5 to 2 nautical miles safe separation distance to avoid those kind of issues. And notably, the two groups that would be most impacted by that are the Steamship Authority and the Highline Cruises, which are the two ferry lines transporting around 3 million passengers per year. And they have both opposed this project because of threats to passenger safety. In the UK, I mentioned some of the reports that were done, and just to give you an idea, UK Air Warfare Center 2005, the presence of a hole in detection at all levels overhead a wind turbine farm was shown. So again, issues with air traffic control, radar interference that would cause significant concerns. Probably 2 years ago, the FAA issued a no hazard determination. Since these studies have come to light, they're actually researching those British studies, and they have found that the proposed location of the wind turbines is in an area which may affect existing radar facilities. So there is work underway looking at that. And again, in terms of directly affected groups, you've got all 3 local airports, Barnstable, Nantucket, and Martha's Vineyard, all opposed to this project and all very, very concerned about radar interference. And the last area was military defense. Our Department of Defense met with the Ministry of Defense from the UK to look at what types of radar interference may be present for military operations. And we've got PAVE PAWS at the Otis Air Force Base, which is the missile defense detection system for the Northeast. Congressman Delahunt was recently briefed by Department of Defense on their investigations looking at the impact of radar interference, and he says, yesterday's DoD report was cause for profound concern. There is ample evidence to suggest wind turbines cause some degree of interference. So the public safety issue is a very, very real issue.
I think time is close.
Okay, I'm almost done. Can you just buzz through that? Buzz through that. Go ahead, Ernie. Groups that oppose Cape Wind, a wide variety of fishing groups, most of the chambers of commerce on Cape Cod, most of the towns on Cape Cod, fishing boating groups, Attorney General Riley, Governor Romney, and you can look at that. I won't go into it. Keep going. Last point I just wanted to get to before I finish is the question of, are there better ways of achieving these same benefits? And I think the answer is a resounding yes. This is a supply-side solution. We've got a lot of opportunities on the demand side for energy conservation and energy efficiency programs, most of which go hand in hand in Europe with a lot of the offshore wind installations. The Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnership said that in New England, if we were just to achieve 50% of the energy potential available to us, we could fully meet our rise in demand. So again, there's other opportunities on the demand side. And the last, I'll skip through, but the last thing is deep water sites, which I'm very optimistic about. You can go on. There have been several groups underway, the Offshore Wind Collaborative, a joint venture between General Electric and the Department of Energy looking at deep water technology and saying that within a relatively short period of time, they're looking at a prototype for deep water sites that wouldn't have a lot of the concerns. In finishing, again, the cost of this project, far exceeds its benefits. The project benefits the developer far more than the public, and there are better alternatives to achieving the benefits the project claims.
Okay, thank you. No problem. Thank you. Jim Gordon, now there's got to be something to be said for this project, and you'll say it. Jim Gordon of Cape Wind Associates.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming today. Let me tell you a little bit about what our company's been doing for over 30 years in New England. Basically, our company has been involved in a wide range of energy conservation, pollution control, and electric generation projects. The inspiration, what started our efforts was the company was really started after the second Arab oil embargo when America's supplies were cut off, and it created a lot of economic dislocation and societal problems with gas lines. And at the time, after the second oil embargo, America was importing about 28% of its energy. And I will tell you that I agree with Audra that we have got to start focusing a lot more on energy conservation. In fact, that's what our company did for the first 10 years of its existence. We have to really focus on improving CAFE standards, increasing miles per gallon in automobiles. But we also need to start looking at shifting towards a more sustainable energy future with renewable energy. Now, one of the reasons that we undertook the effort to develop Cape Wind is because on a national level, there was a clear signal from Congress to develop renewable energy resources. So there were clearly, over the last several years, there have been a focus on policy initiatives to develop more renewable energy. Bringing it down to the state level, Massachusetts implemented a renewable portfolio standard that is requiring a certain amount of our electricity resources to come from renewable energy. Now, I want to make one point very clear. There is no silver bullet, and I'm not standing before you to say that Cape Wind is going to solve our global warming and climate change issues. I'm not going to tell you that it's going to solve our rising rates of childhood asthma and the health links to fossil fuels. I'm not going to tell you that it's going to solve our foreign energy dependency questions, but I will tell you that it is a substantive step forward in really addressing these unique energy and environmental and economic challenges that we face as a region and as a nation. Now, bringing it down towards the Cape and Islands. The Cape and Islands, according to the American Lung Association, has the worst air quality in Massachusetts. The Cape and Islands also has a sole aquifer, so it has water supply and quality issues looming on the horizon. The Cape and Islands does not have a robust waste disposal infrastructure. And Cape Wind will produce 75% of the Cape and Islands electricity with zero pollutant emissions, zero water consumption, and zero waste discharge. So this project goes to addressing some of the unique challenges that the Cape and Islands is facing. And let me talk about the overriding challenge that the Cape and Islands faces. Because it is a low-lying coastal community, it is most susceptible to the impacts of global warming and climate change. And what I mean is, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute tells us that beaches are eroding and we're losing precious beaches. We also know that climate change is causing more intense and frequent hurricanes. We also know that ocean temperatures are warming, sea levels are rising. These are all the impacts of climate change. And let me tell you, my family lives in a house that is closest to the Cape Wind project in South Yarmouth. And about a year ago, we received a letter from our insurance company, and thousands of other residents on the Cape and Islands received a similar letter where the insurance companies are canceling flood insurance because they're concerned about increased coastal property and damage. And Cape Wind, according to the National Resource Defense Council, is the largest single greenhouse gas reduction initiative in the United States and perhaps the world. So this project is going towards solving and addressing some of the challenges that we face before us. You know, the Edison Electric Institute and the New England ISO, which manages the electric grid, tell us that our electrical consumption is going to increase by about 40% over the next 20 years. That same organization, the people that run our grid, tell us that if we don't put new electric generation capacity on the grid by 2008, this area is going to face looming blackouts. What are our choices? We can build more coal, oil, and nuclear power plants, or we can start transitioning towards renewable energy. Now, I have to tell you that energy infrastructure decisions, all of them are very difficult and controversial. Our company successfully developed 7 of the cleanest natural gas-fired power plants in New England, and every one of those projects had an opposition group. But electricity is obviously central to powering our economy. It goes to public health and safety, environmental quality, all of these issues. We all use this product daily. So we have choices. And luckily, those choices are not, the decision as to whether Cape Wind is built will not be a decision that Jim Gordon makes or Audra Parker makes. There are 17 federal and state agencies that have been reviewing this project under the National Environmental Policy Act review for the last 4 years. We have generated a 4,000-page draft environmental impact statement, which covers all of the areas that Audra just talked about. It looks at navigation on sea and air. It looks at reductions in pollutant emissions, and that draft EIS showed compelling public interest benefits at minimal impact in terms of lowering electric costs, reducing pollutant emissions like NOx, SO2, mercury, greenhouse gases. It went over the socioeconomic aspects like tourism and the economy and public health. And this was an extremely positive document, and we are working towards the final environmental impact statement with the 17 federal and state agencies. The Massachusetts Energy Facility Siting Board, on another separate regulatory track, which is the agency charged with ensuring a reliable electricity supply in Massachusetts at least cost and environmental impact, conducted a 33-month adjudicatory process on the Cape Wind project. And Ms. Parker's group and experts and lawyers were in that adjudicatory process. You had to swear in on the evidence, and we were there, as were some other interveners. After that 33-month adjudicatory process, the Massachusetts Energy Facility Siting Board approved the Cape Wind project on the basis that Cape Wind would lower electricity prices, provide regional air quality benefits, improve electric transmission reliability, and contribute to Massachusetts' renewable portfolio standard. So today, please listen carefully to Ms. Parker and me, but remember, there are impartial agencies that are reviewing this project. And in the DIS, there are 17 federal and state agencies, and not all of them are going to come to the exact consensus on every issue, but it was clear that we had a very favorable draft EIS, and we had a favorable decision through the Massachusetts Energy Facility Siting Board. Now, we believe that this project is so important because it will inspire other communities to tap into their indigenous energy resources. This is an emerging industry. And in a report that was released by the Department of Energy and the Mass Tech Collaborative, they said that there are 900,000 megawatts of offshore wind potential in the United States. To put that in perspective, our current electric generation capacity is 900,000 megawatts. Now, I'm not here to infer that offshore wind is going to replace all of our electrical generation capacity, but it can be an increasing part of our energy mix, and it can help us. Ms. Parker said that 2% oil generation. Well, on the Cape and Islands, over 40% of our electricity is generated by heavy oil from the Canal plant, which is one of the Filthy Five plants. And every hour that Cape Wind is operating, it will displace a more expensive fossil fuel plant and a more heavily polluting plant. I still have a little more time. So this is really about whether we as a society, okay, whether we think globally and act locally. Somebody has to be the first to develop and tap into this vast energy resource. Why not Massachusetts? We've been known as the cradle of technical innovation. We have institutions like Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, MIT Oceans Program, Mass Maritime Academy. We have the heritage of design and marine construction. This project will create, during construction, anywhere from 600 to 1,000 new jobs. But more importantly, as a first mover advantage, this project can help attract industry around developing this important new energy resource. And I'm convinced that Cape Wind will become one of the largest ecotourism attractions in New England. I'm convinced that schools will send field trips of students to cruise around the Cape Wind project. I am convinced that this will be a point of interest for tourism, just as the offshore wind farms have become in Europe. I have visited offshore wind farms in beautiful seaside communities like the Cape and Islands, and they have not harmed tourism. They have not harmed property values. What they are doing is providing clean energy, and the communities are embracing these projects. You know, before the ink was dry on this proposal, the Alliance to Protect Nantucket Sound opposed this project. Even as the science and the engineering and the merits of this project are coming back. Now, if you look at the major national environmental organizations, ask yourself this question. Why is Conservation Law Foundation, Greenpeace, MassPIRG, Union of Concerned Scientists supporting this project? Why is the Maritime Trade Council, which is a group of 70,000 members, which has the largest fishing fleet, the International Seafarers Union, as well as people that are marine pilots, they drive ferries, why are they supporting this project? Why are health organizations like the American Lung Association, Physicians for Social Responsibility, supporting this project? It's not perfect. No energy project is perfect. And no energy project produces zero impacts. But I want to ask you this. Do the benefits of a clean energy project that can help lower our electric costs, increase our energy independence, improve public health, does that outweigh going to the beach and looking on the horizon, and it would have to be a clear day, and seeing wind turbines that appear approximately a half-inch off the horizon? Now, I know you've seen the 417 feet high, and they are large wind turbines in order to capture the wind and produce the most benefits. But the reality is, from the closest beach, they will appear about a half-inch off the horizon. Does a modest visual impact outweigh the benefits that this project is going to deliver to the region? Does that outweigh having the opportunity for us, you and us, to embrace renewable energy and really become a worldwide leader in promoting and embracing this technology?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Time flies when you're having fun, and we're already a little behind. I'd like to cut the rebuttal maybe to just one quick exchange. Pick a point and hammer it, if you would, and then let's just open it up to people's questions. Audra?
Yes, I'm chomping at the bit my point.
I'm dying to hear why we didn't know that the Cape and Islands have the worst air in Massachusetts. Is it true?
I think it is true, but I think that it's not dependent on local electricity generation, like Jim pointed out with Canal Electric. What I understand is that a lot of it is brought from the Midwest on prevailing winds. So I'm not sure that, while many of the...
Overflies all of Massachusetts and lands on the Cape and Islands?
I think it goes from the Midwest on prevailing winds, and that is like 50% of the pollutant that we have on Cape and Islands. I don't think it's coming from local sources necessarily. The one point, that was not the one I was chopping at the bit to rebut.
Go for it.
The one I actually wanted to rebut was what Jim was talking about these wonderful and very favorable impartial reviews, and I just wanted to touch on that. The draft environmental impact statement that Jim talked about that was coming out of the Army Corps of Engineers is a seriously flawed document. The Army Corps of Engineers is no longer the lead agency. They were an inappropriate agency to be doing the review. They typically permit obstructions to navigation, not power plants, and now the Department of Interior, with the passage of the Energy Policy Act in August of this last year, is in charge. The other notable thing is that the draft environmental impact statement, while largely favorable to the project, as Jim pointed out, was in fact heavily criticized by organizations such as the United States Environmental Protection Agency, which gave the review its worst possible rating, a Category 3 inadequate. Department of Interior itself said that the review was inaccurate, incomplete, and oftentimes misleading. So I just want to point out that while the Army Corps, the Army Corps has been recognized as the inappropriate agency to do the review, and key sister federal agencies have been very critical of it. And the other permit that Jim mentioned, which was from the Environmental Facility Siting Board, I'd just like to make a little bit more accurate. It's a conditional permit, and it's conditional upon getting other state permits, and it's also something that's under appeal because the standards that were used in the review of the Cape Wind project were changed midstream. So it is a conditional permit under appeal and pertain only to the cable, not to the 130 wind turbines.
Jim, a point or two of rebuttal, and then we'll just open it up.
Well, first, as far as the draft environmental impact statement goes, and Audra saying that the Army Corps of Engineers was the inappropriate agency, basically Congress gave Minerals Management the authority to grant leases for offshore wind farms. That is the new implementation in the Energy Policy Act, and they are encouraging 10,000 megawatts of new non-hydro renewable energy resources on public lands. So the Army, none of the draft environmental impact statement is going to be superseded by the Minerals Management coming in and just being the agency that's going to be focusing on finishing the final environmental impact statement and putting together the lease for this project. As far as a conditional, Audra said it's being appealed. The Mass Energy Facility Siting Board is being appealed. It is being appealed. It's being appealed by her organization and nobody else. Many people watched the unfolding of this regulatory process, and there is no doubt. The media that has been reporting on this have said that this was a very favorable draft EIS. It's a draft. There is some data that is missing that is going to be put into the final environmental impact statement, but it is a draft EIS, and it shows a very favorable path for this project moving forward. I do want to mention one other important thing, and that is I think that what you heard today from Audra was a lot of fear-mongering, and let me give you an example. When this project was announced, the Alliance to Protect Nantucket Sound basically said this was going to be a killing field for birds. And the avian issue was something that they were really pushing, and they're still pushing today. Now, while that dialogue was going on, the Mass Audubon Society stepped back from all the politics and the controversy and decided to embark on what is now almost a 4-year field investigations review of all of the desktop data and actually visiting offshore wind farms in Europe to see exactly what the impact on avian species is. And you probably all saw last week a front page article in the Boston Globe that after this careful deliberation, the Mass Audubon Society has given its preliminary approval to this project. And they did it because they said, look, our mission is to protect birds, and we recognize that there will be some bird impacts from an offshore wind farm. But when they put it into the context of climate change and its impacts on avian species, wildlife, and our own health, it was very clear to them to give preliminary support to this project. So we're pretty pleased about that. And what it shows is that, look, everybody can have a visceral reaction to a new idea, to a technology in a particular location. But what I urge all of you to do is to keep an open mind and watch if this regulatory process will be completed so that, and I say if because you've all seen the publicity about 2 Alaskan congressmen who are trying to short-circuit this process, and I think it's because there are some people in special interests that do not want to see the end of this regulatory process come out, because I think it's going to show that on the merits, this is a compelling project and it will move forward.
Jim, thank you.
Yep.
I'd urge you both, please, to just come, each take a mic, and let's go to the phones with people's own questions in this room. There are a lot of issues sort of outstanding that haven't quite been resolved, but let's do our best in the next 15 minutes. Please.
Jim, if you had a green light...
Do you want to identify yourself?
I'm sorry, I'm Ted Lyons, GBH. If you had a green light today, how far out in the future would you be replacing the claimed 75% of the electricity usage or providing for the Cape?
In other words, if the project was up and running, how many, if today, go for it? Well, the project would be up and running in about 24 months, and it would provide 75% of the Cape and Islands electricity, and this is according to...
Starting in 24 months?
Yes, and this is according to NSTAR, the ISO, and...
Just a follow-up question for Audra. If you were to stop this project today, is there an alternative that you're promoting that in 24 months could reach the claim that Jim is making?
I guess I'd answer that 2 ways. One is there were 22 alternative sites which were considered in the Army Corps review, and they went very quickly from 22 down to a short list of 5 or 6. I guess that's one of the things that I would look at. Secondly,
so you would look at another site for the same type
potentially, if that was the alternative,
project?
if that were legitimate alternative. And I think on the scale that Cape Wind has defined for renewables, that's probably the only pragmatic thing, is to go with offshore wind.
So it sounds like there may be some underlying agreement about the science and the need, but we're really talking about a site.
No, I think the problem is that, Cape Wind defined what's called a purpose and need statement in the Army Corps review. They define the project as 200 megawatts or more. So the problem is when you start with defining a project of that scale, there's very few locations for that. So there weren't alternatives considered like a small or a larger number of small distributed sites, which would be another reasonable alternative. So I'm saying that it was very much driven by Cape Wind. And then the other thing that I was suggesting before was on the demand side, the energy efficiency side. Again, Jim said that there was a study, I don't remember who it was from, but by 2008 that we'd have a supply issue. Well, that's based on current demand projections without doing these energy efficiency programs. And there is a lot of potential on that side as well to put that date out further than 2008.
Ted, let me say this about defining the purpose and need. Massachusetts is not going to meet its renewable portfolio standard unless Cape Wind is built. We've been talking about renewable energy in Massachusetts since the first Earth Day speech, and we have very little of it. So this is a project where the federal and state regulators looked at these 22 sites, and they agreed that the optimal site to put this project was on Horseshoe Shoal. Now, Audra did not answer your question. First of all, let me say this, that the projections I mentioned took into account the energy efficiency programs and the conservation programs that are being promoted by the utilities, okay? So right now, there isn't another alternative to bring in 75% of the Cape and Islands electricity with zero pollutant emissions.
Just one more quick question. Both of you, actually. Forget agencies and really interested parties. Is there a scientific agreement about the value of this project, and where does that reside? Is there a group of relevant, independent scientists who have spoken on this issue?
What do you mean by value of the project?
Science.
Scientific value.
Scientific value.
Environmental.
Can I take a first crack at that?
Sure.
Greenpeace is an organization that has scientists in that organization, and for several decades, their mandate has been protecting marine and coastal environments. Conservation Law Foundation has scientists in their organization, as does the Union of Concerned Scientists and National Resource Defense Council. These are impartial groups. They have no connection or financial interest in this project whatsoever. And they are supporting Cape Wind because they do see the scientific value of offsetting 1 million tons of greenhouse gas annually, reducing NOx and SO2 that are causing ozone, which I think is the real blight, visual blight on the Cape and Islands. So I think there have been many scientists, both in the regulatory side and with the NGOs, that are focused on energy and health and that are supporting it.
I don't really have a good answer to that question. I mean, we have been pretty puzzled by Greenpeace's blatant endorsement of this project, where they have been opposed to similar projects in Europe. So it's one of the things that we've actually been puzzled about. So I don't really know if there is some sort of affiliation, but I do know what Jim's saying is correct, that Greenpeace, Union of Concerned Scientists, and CLF have been very staunch advocates of their project.
Yeah, hi, Jordan Weinstein from GBH. I have to say that from where I sit and after listening to you both, the most compelling argument that either one of you has made are the endorsements. And because it seems like the science can be debated, but for you, Jim, to have on your side the NRDC, these are, I mean, very respected environmental organizations, the NRDC, Greenpeace, the Union of Concerned Scientists, the Mass Audubon Society, the Conservation Law Foundation. I mean, the scales are so tipped in your favor in terms of endorsements from legitimate environmental organizations. My question really is to Audra. You tell us now you have no understanding of why these organizations are supporting them. You really ought to.
Well, I'm saying from a standpoint of on a legitimate basis, because you have, as I point.
Are you saying the all in
Well, could I finish my point?
Are in the back pockets and have vested interest?
I don't know. I'm saying that that's very possible. What I was saying was. Thank you. What I was saying was that you have organizations like the EPA, okay? Is that a legitimate organization that have been extremely concerned about this project and have been critical of some of the emissions and the benefits that have been claimed by this project? So I agree, you have organizations like Greenpeace. I don't know the reason behind the endorsement. I'm being very honest and sincere about that. But what I am saying is that U.S. EPA is opposed to it. The Humane Society is opposed to it. The International Wildlife Coalition is opposed to it. You've got Governor Romney, Attorney General Riley, Congressman Delahunt, almost every local town. So you've got a great number of organizations, Mass Fishermen's Partnership. So anyone with a vested interest in that area that understands the cost side of the equation is opposed to the project. So I think on both sides you have a very lengthy list of opposition and support.
Let me point out a couple of differences here, which may shed some light on what Audra just said. The group she just mentioned opposed the project before the ink was dry on the proposal. They came out to oppose the project before any of the environmental reviews had come in from the regulatory authorities. Now I'll contrast that with these environmental organizations you mentioned. None of them came out to support the project when it first came out. We would have loved that to happen. But they said, we want to wait till we go through the draft environmental impact statement, the Massachusetts Energy Facility Siting Board hearings, and then we will make a decision as to whether this project is worthy of support. So what you have are two instances of what I said earlier. One is a visceral reaction where some of our political leaders have immediately come out to oppose this before any of the environmental reviews were in. It's like a judge granting a verdict before hearing any of the evidence from the prosecutor and the defense and listening to the jury. And that's exactly what has happened here, that, you know, this is look, we've all heard of the not in my backyard syndrome. And I think what you have is a stark illustration of, and look, I live on the Cape and Islands, okay? If there were no energy projects ever needed, it would be wonderful. But unfortunately, we live in a society where we have to turn on the television set and watch WGBH.
I just wanted to correct one of the things that Jim actually just said, which was that these organizations gave their approval prior to it. My example of the Environmental Protection Agency was in response to the draft environmental impact statement, Jim.
The EPA, Audra said that the Environmental Protection Agency is opposed to the Cape Wind project. She said that 2 minutes ago.
I said there are concerns with overstated emissions benefits in the review.
But you did say earlier that they were opposed to it. That's completely false. They are not opposed to it. They are one of 17 federal agencies involved in this review. If I have 17 journalists in a room trying to agree on one issue, I think you're going to have different opinions and consensus on and differences on certain areas. So the EPA is not opposed to the project. And Audra said they're concerned about the emissions of the project. Well, there are no emissions. There are zero emissions.
They're concerned about the emissions being overstated, is what I said, Jim.
There are no emissions.
On the mass emissions reductions. The Mass Audubon example that Jim gave also is a little bit misleading, because Mass Audubon, while it can give its conditional approval or preliminary approval, is actually not one of the regulatory agencies. And Fish and Wildlife Service, which actually is, said that the Mass Audubon coming out in the media and making this pronouncement was premature. So Fish and Wildlife Service, which is actually part of the Department of Interior and the agency that is leading the review, has been critical of Mass Audubon.
Folks, can I just say one thing?
I think it's a great question, John, but I think we've heard the answers we're going to hear.
Susan Reed, what I'm curious about is, since Cape Wind is saying this is filling an unmet need for the Cape and Islands, what do Cape and Islands residents feel about it? I mean, you've certainly picked a spot where the Steamship Authority, which, as Audra was saying, transports 3 million people to the islands a year, opposes it. The airports oppose it on safety grounds. It is, the region happens to be a national treasure, and certainly a Massachusetts treasure. I wonder, I know in my town there are things called ballot referendums, where what do people on Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, and the Cape want? And what does Massachusetts want?
Is that a question for Jim or me or both?
Both of you.
I'll start if you don't mind. The project has much wider spread support in Massachusetts overall than it has in the Cape and Islands. The Cape and Islands is pretty much of a dead heat. You've got about 50%. If you take out the uncertains, you've got about 50% for the project and 50% opposed. In the polling that we've done, one thing is clear, that the closer you are to actually the cost or the impact, the more likely you are to oppose it. And secondarily, the more educated you are about the project and the trade-offs in the project, the more likely you are to oppose it. So most of the groups, the agencies, the towns that are directly impacted by the project are in very strong opposition to it. And one of the experiences that I personally had was the Army Corps held a series of public hearings. One was in Cambridge, one was in Yarmouth on the mainland of Cape Cod, one was in Nantucket, and one was in Martha's Vineyard. And at the Cambridge hearing, I'd say there was pretty large majority of support for the project. Very different experience when you went to the Cape and Islands, where people were very outspoken against the project. I'd say with the most outspoken being the island of Nantucket, but a clear majority in the Cape and Islands at those hearings being outspoken against it. So it's a very different picture between Cape and Islands and Massachusetts overall.
Well, I think the latest poll that has come out was conducted by the University of New Hampshire and University of Massachusetts. That poll showed 6-1 statewide in favor of the Cape Wind project. And I agree with Audra, it showed a split on the Cape before and after. But let me make this statement to you, Susan. If it was 10-1 in favor in Massachusetts and Cape Cod, and at the end of the day, through the regulatory review, if it shows that this project is going to produce more detriments than benefits, I would be the first person to say, forget about the wide approval. The project should not be done. On the other hand, if it had less support than it does now, but the environmental review shows that this project is going to produce compelling public interest benefits at minimal impacts, the project should go forward. And my point is this: energy decisions and choices are really critical to our future, to our economy, our health, and they're not left up to popularity contests. In fact, this Commonwealth has set up an energy facility siting board purposefully to insulate these critical decisions from politics or parochial viewpoints. And that's basically how the Massachusetts legislature has set up the process to decide whether we choose an energy project or not.
Jim and Audra, thank you very, very much. Is there a last question from the floor? Please.
Maureen Kelleher. So why does it have to be in that location?
Why?
Why are you proposing that one location?
Because here's why, okay? On Horseshoe Shoal, we have some of the strongest wind resources on the East Coast. It also is a very shallow shoal. It's extremely shallow. It has low wave heights because it's protected and sheltered by Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. So that the existing technology and the technology for the foreseeable next 10 or 15 years, they're going to be built, I'm talking about commercial viable projects, are going to be built in conditions that match what I just mentioned. So it's really, like Mother Nature dictates where the project is built. So we have a lot of wind around there, but we have a lot of wealthy and influential people as well. So my question is to you, why not on Horseshoe Shoal? Because it's not a choice between Cape Wind and nothing on Horseshoe Shoal. It's a choice between Cape Wind or a coal plant in an area of lower socioeconomic strength or influence. And there's an environmental justice issue here. We can't be building all of our hazardous waste facilities or all of our energy generation facilities or all of our football stadiums in areas just because they don't have the political clout and the wealth to fight a project like this.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, actually, because one of the things that Cape Wind and Jim particularly likes to talk about is the fact that their project is the gateway and the beginning of this offshore wind revolution. So if there are no other appropriate sites, how is it going to be the beginning of this offshore industry?
It's a very good question, and it's the same. Let me give you an analogy. When the oil industry started, they first drilled on land. Okay? When wind power started, it was first on land. Then, when the oil industry started to explore, they went to nearshore installations. And as the technology evolved, and as they got more experience, and it evolved incrementally, they went to deeper areas. I think that Cape Wind is going to, why I say it's the gateway, because this is a technically and economically viable project on Horseshoe Shoal. And if we build it, we're going to get a lot of experience. And ultimately, as the technology advances, we can go out to deeper areas and tap this vast resource.
I would prefer to take my taxpayer dollars, invest in the joint venture that Department of Energy and GE has to develop those deep water sites so that we are really a leader and use the existing experience in Europe for leverage and for that direct experience. And I think that's a win-win situation for the public and for us if we really want to be in a leadership position, as Jim had discussed before.
Well, last question comes from it's going to be quick.
Yeah. Okay, Mark Huffman. It seems beyond all the polls taken of the populace living anywhere near there and every economic prediction, everything else that you've both cited, just one thing that concerns me in particular, which seems that could put the kibosh on the whole thing if it's not dealt with, is with the three airports closest to this area are all in opposition. I'd like you, each of you, to address that concern, because it seems that alone, if there's an issue of people dying in planes, then you got all the other stuff about the birds and how people like the look of it or not.
I agree, and I think that, one of the things that Jim talked about was the Alliance fear-mongering. And, because of the work of the Alliance, a lot of these issues have come to light, these public safety issues, because we did spend time trying to educate key decision makers on some of these very legitimate public safety concerns. And as you point out, it's not just the three airports, but also the two ferry lines, transporting millions and millions of passengers. So again, you have to ask yourself, renewable energy is great, but at what cost? And if the cost is a legitimate concern about public safety, that's more than visual concern. That's more than a lot of the other concerns. That's a very, very serious, legitimate concern that needs to be reviewed. And something like radar interference wasn't even looked at in the draft environmental impact statement because this is an issue that has recently come to light.
Dan Wolf is the CEO of Cape Air, which is the largest airline in that region. Dan Wolf wrote a letter to the Army Corps of Engineers. He's had 27 years experience as a pilot going back and forth through the Cape and Islands, and said that the Cape Wind project will not pose a hazard to air navigation. More importantly, and look, I'm not saying that certain boards won't take a position, but the Federal Aviation Administration has carefully looked at the Cape Wind project. It's out of the air flight paths, number one. You should know that. Number two, the FAA approved the project under the protestations of these airport commissions. The airport commissions appealed the FAA permit. The FAA took it all back again, looked at it, and they issued us the permit again.
Contingent upon looking at the radar studies. It's in the letter of determination. It says, yes, they reinforce what you said, but given research into these UK studies.
Look, the whole project is contingent on finishing the final environmental impact statement. Radar has been looked at in the DEIS, and it is being looked at right now. as part of the final EIS, and we're convinced that, like many of the other red herrings that have been raised out there, we think that is not going to be an issue.
Dan Wolf is one individual versus all 3 airports and 2 ferry lines. It's really analogous to the point you brought up about, Greenpeace. This is not taking one captain of one ferry line. This is the ferry line, the High Line, the Steamship Authority, the Nantucket Airport, the Barnstable Airport, the Martha's Vineyard Airport.
We've stretched the hour. You've given us a terrifically interesting, complicated ground for making a decision.
Pleasure, Jim.
We will now go to our jury boxes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jim Gordon and Audra Parker.